In this tutorial, we are going to look at a couple things. First, we're going to look at how to create a very basic leaf in terms of something that would be in the background. This isn't like if you were making this as like your primary object, but this is something where it's a pretty quick way to fill in some areas. And then we're going to start looking at some other of the material effects. I kind of covered that a little bit earlier, but we're going to look at a few more that will be, potentially useful for this project that we're working on. So let's go ahead, and if you haven't already, please create a new scene. And then we're going to change our view so we can see all four views, and we're going to start in our top view. And in our top view, there's an image that will be uploaded to Canvas that I'd like you to download, and then we're going to use that as the back for this. So if you don't remember how to do that, it's you go to Options in your viewport, you go down to Configure, go over to Back, the Back tab over here, click on the ellipsis to load an image, and then we're going to grab the leaf fractal-like.jpg and open that up. Now we have this set as our background, and so the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my transparency some. You don't have to do that, but that's what I'm going to do. And then we're going to use the polygon pen tool, which we haven't really used too much in order to model this, because we're basically going to create a very simple polygon model of this leaf. And we're not going to worry about any of the edge detail. Like I said, this is intended to be a really simple model that is just going to be flat. It's going to be as a plane that we then are going to warp with a spline. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to model mode. We're going to click on the polygon pen tool down here. And then to use the polygon pen tool, to draw the first polygon, you need to click essentially the entire boundary of that polygon. And I'm going to make reasonably large polygons. And I'm going to have them centered on the center vein of the leaf. So I'm going to go down here. I'm not going to do the stem right now, and clearly not those fingers. So what I want to do is I just want to create 4 points. So 3, and then the fourth one should come back here. And then I can go back to the very first point. When I click, that creates a polygon, right? If I hover over it, you can see the outline there. Now with the next ones, when you make these polygons, you want to start from one of these ending points. And if you click on one of the other points that you've previously selected, it will stop the tool from functioning the way you think it will. So what we want to do is we want to click on that point, come out here wherever we want this next one to go, come straight over here, and then go back to this point, and it'll finish off that polygon for us. All right, so I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to click. I'm going to go up the stem a little bit, over here, drop down there, and I'm just going to keep doing this until I have this whole leaf done. Now, we can choose, these are really long polygons. It's a lot easier to make a series of longer polygons, and with this next one, I'm actually going to try and make this a straighter line. There we go. Than it is to create a grid by hand in this case. And so, but what we can always do is we can go in and go up to the mesh menu and subdivide once we're ready to do that. But we also want to keep the polygons as low as possible. We could use even fewer polygons, but we want several polygons because we're going to be deforming this. And when we deform this, then if we didn't have enough polygons, the deformations would look really bizarre. So we want to have a reasonable number, but not enough to drive ourselves totally insane. And you'll see that I missed on the edges here a little bit, and that's fine for what we're doing. Note that even at the end, I did do a quad. I did do a quad there rather than a triangle, and that just makes life easier later on. Okay, so for this next one, I can't go up the stem to do these points because there's 2 points here, so I actually have to go out first. And with this one, it's going to be a little strange. I'm going to try to pop that down there. And now I have to figure out where I want to start this one. I can start it on the outside. and I can make up some of the space, and then that's all I have to do, right? So with these, if I start on the outside, I click here, and then I tell it which point I want to connect to here, it's done. So I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around, and this time I'm going to try and make up some of that space to this next point. And if you're having a hard time seeing those edges, right, we could always reduce the intensity of this image again, but I can basically see where the points are, so it makes things, oops. Oh, and if you have the polygon pen selected and you click on the point, and you click drag, you can actually move the point around rather than just clicking to start a new subdivision. What just happened? There we go, I just failed to do that. So with that one I messed up, so I'm just going to pull that out, click again, and just finish this thing up pretty quick. Okay, and with some of these other points I might snug them in just a little bit, but really what I want to do is I want to make sure that I actually have a little bit of overlap on all of these because of the way we're going to be working with this material when we get done with it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out a little bit more, and the same goes for this point. In fact, I might even move this point down the stem just a touch and pull these guys out a bit more. Because what we're going to do is we're going to use the alpha channel, we're going to use the same image as to make the material for this. Okay, so I've done the basic modeling on this. My polygons are there. They're not perfect. They're kind of weird shaped in some places, but it'll work for our purposes. So I've got this done. So what's the next step? So the next step is, now that we have this set, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply our material to this object, and then we will use the spline tools to spline warp and essentially bend this along the spline. That gives us a lot more freedom to take this flat object and do that, rather than manually manipulate the points, although manually manipulating the points would give us a lot better result if this was the foreground, one of the objects we were most focused on. So I'm going to go ahead and change my layout back to standard. I'm going to double click to create a new material, and in the color channel for that material I am going to load an image, and once that comes up I'm going to grab the same file and open it up. So that's my color channel, and then to make my life easier I'm going to click on that little arrow. I'm going to go to copy shader. I'm going to go down to the alpha channel, turn that on. I'm going to go down to my texture, and I'm going to go ahead and paste my shader. Now when I do that, you'll see that the whole thing looks somewhat transparent, right? Because what it's doing is it's taking the luminance, right, and it's splitting that up. And so there's a couple things I want to do. First, there is no image alpha, unfortunately, so I'm going to turn that off. I could always go in and create image alpha by masking this off and making it have a transparent background. But I can also work with this bright white background. So if I check mark invert, I think that will do it. Why am I? Oh, sorry, there we go. So the thing I need to uncheck is the soft setting, right? And I actually don't want to invert it. I want to have it be normal. And what this allows me to do is it's hard to see on this preview. If I change to a rounded cube or something, there we go, and make this huge. Right, you can see that now I've got these leaves. You'll also notice potentially that there's this white outline on there. But let's go ahead and apply this to our leaf first. And we'll see that when we do that, we don't get the result we would expect, right? We get something crazy happening. And that's because by default, it's mapping this texture as though this is a sphere, which it clearly is not. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our texture tag over here for this polygon object. We're going to come down, and where it says projection spherical, we're going to change that to cubic. right? And when we change it to cubic, we might try flat as well just to see what we get. That is not going to work. Frontal is just aiming at the camera, right? So let's go ahead and, yeah, we'll just do cubic. And you'll see that when we do that, we actually have, right, many copies of this leaf on the surface of this object, which means we need to make some additional changes. I'm going to close the material editor. I'm also going to change the display on my top view to garage shading lines, because then again I'll be able to see those leaves from a top view, and this will actually make lining this up a lot easier. So what I need to do is I need to increase the length in the U and the V, and then I'm going to have to do some offsetting. I know the length in the V is like close to 300%, and I believe the length in the U is close to 400%. And so now I just need to do the offset. And this is just because I've done this once before already. And I'm just going to do the offset until I get something set, and it's really close. I might drop this to 100 there we go. And it looks like that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my perspective view, and I'm going to bring this full screen, and I'm going to render this. Okay. So you'll see now I have something that looks a lot like a leaf, right? It's got this rough edge. However, there's this kind of white glow on the edges. And so what I need to do is I need to fix that. And the way that I can fix that is if I open up my material and I make sure I am on my alpha channel, and I have these two options here, right? I have the alpha option and I have the delta option. And so right now the alpha option is basically saying remove white from the image, right? And the delta is how much should I remove? Now, if I click on the wrong colors here, I'm going to have some problems, but let's go ahead and open up our top view. I am going to go ahead and just set the display to lines again so that I have a much flatter color. And I'm going to go ahead and crank up the opacity of this as well, or crank down the transparency of my background, right? So I'm going to go to Options, Configure, and then, decrease that to 0 so I have the true colors there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the eyedropper. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on a couple different colors so you can kind of see what happens. So I'm going to go with something really dark. And then let's go ahead and look at all of our views, and you'll see that it didn't really change anything, right? There's still a pretty white edge. So what I'm going to do is instead, I'm going to go ahead and zoom. I'm going to hit escape. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on this and move over so I can see that edge. And I'm going to go ahead and click somewhere in here. And now what you'll see is that I've effectively removed all of that bright white colored edge. Now if I zoom in pretty close, you're going to see that I accidentally also removed a bunch of the veins, and that looks really cool, but that's not what we're going for, right? We don't want this to be rotted out, but you could use this to make a leaf that has no right, that all this fill is gone. You could try and tweak things to do that, tweak these settings. So that's nice to know. But now what I want to do is I actually want to go in here and I want to make this a little bit more rich, and then hit OK and render this again. And you'll see I'm still losing some stuff, so that means I need to make this color a little bit darker. Hit OK and render it again, and I'm still losing a little bit, so I need to go down a little bit darker. Render it again, and I'm still missing a couple pieces, but let's see what we got on the edge there. Right, so I've still got a little bit of this highlight here on the edge, and I am missing some chunks in the middle, so maybe what I should do is just grab this color again, grab something in there and render this and see if that works. Nope, that was too much. So it needs to be a little darker. that's pretty good. I'm not going to notice those tiny little holes. And I still have a little bit of a halo around the edge of this. But that's something that I'm going to have to deal with, right? What would be ideal is if I went into Photoshop and actually cut this thing out and then made the tips of these leaves a little bit greener. You know, if I was working on a professional project, that is one of the things I would do to make sure that this was much better. But now, you know, if this leaf is somewhat far in the background, no one's going to notice that. So let's look at, now that we've done that, let's see how we can bend this leaf and give it a little bit more variety than it typically has. So the way we can attempt to bend this, we've got a couple options. We could try using the bend deformer. And so if I drop the bend deformer on here and I fit this to the parent object, when I go to bend it, all that's going to happen, right, is that it's going to be flipping the leaf and doing some other strange things to it, but it's not going to actually be bending it. And that's because this is a plane and it won't really bend the plane the way that we want it to, right? And maybe what I need is, if I set this to 0.5, let's see if that helps us any. No, right? So see, even if I have some thickness there, it stretches the object, but it doesn't really bend it at all, even though I have plenty of polygons in that axis. So let's go ahead and get rid of our bend, right? Something we've tried, it didn't work. What we're going to need to do is, what is going to work really well is the spline wrap. Is going to be probably our easiest bet to do this. So let's go ahead and create a spline wrap. And we'll make it a child of our polygon. And obviously this isn't going to do anything yet, but in our front view, what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to create a spline that basically just has some arc to it. We could even create a gentle S or something so that the leaf kind of curls. And so what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into sketch mode with my spline to make this fast. I'm going to make this full screen. If I select my polygon and hit Command A in points mode, I can see where those outside boundaries of my points are, right? They're basically the either end of that purple line, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just draw a spline, and I'm doing this with a mouse on a very small surface, so bear with me. Okay, so I've created this spline. Before I apply the spline or anything like that, it's kind of wiggly and rough. And so I'm going to come up here to my spline tools. I'm going to go to spline smooth, and I'm just going to click to remove a bunch of those internal points and smooth out all of these bends. Right, because I have a bunch of points that came in there. Okay, so now I've got a much smoother spline. I could have done this with like 3 Bezier points too. That would work. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to scale the spline and make sure, let's hopefully, oh, that's scaling everything. So I want to make sure I only have the spline selected. The letter T, which currently I'm not going to be able to do anything because I'm not in model mode, so I need to switch to model mode. I'm just going to stretch this out. I want it to be a little bit longer than the object. That just makes life easier when we go to manipulate this. So I can go back to points mode, or I could stay in object mode. Doesn't really matter. So now I've got my spline. I've got my spline wrap. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that the spline wrap knows to use this spline. So I'm going to select the spline wrap. I'm going to click on the little arrow by the spline field, and I'm going to click on spline. And when I do that, crazy things happen, right? First, this leaf is on its side. It's still flat. It doesn't look great. And so I need to make a couple of changes to get this to function. And obviously Y plus is not right. Okay, so, right, this looks terrible. And so the question is, what happened? Why are there chunks of leaf everywhere? And why is it on its side? The first thing we need to do is we can leave the axis at X plus or potentially Z plus. However, we don't want to do Y plus. You can't even see it at this point, but if I zoom, if I hit H, I don't even know where it went. but it creates really bizarre behaviors if we do y plus. So let's go back to x plus. And then I did not mean to set the offset to -1, so I'm going to set that to 0. The thing we need to do is down here there's this rotation option, and there's the up vector. And the up vector, basically, if we put a 1 in any of these fields, it tells it that this is the up vector. So if I put a 1 in the first field, nothing happens, so I'm going to make that 0. If I put a 1 in the second field, nothing happens, so I'm going to make that 0. So I'm going to put a 1 in the third field, and when I do that, it looks like it disappears, but actually, here it is. It's rotated around, and you'll notice that things are really offset right now. And so originally this is set to fit the spline, right? And so the spline is a lot longer than the object, and the end mode is set to extend. So if I go ahead and say keep length, that's going to shorten this, and if I change this to clamp, well, that should fix some things. So now what I need to do is I need to adjust my offset and my from and to. And so I'm going to start with the from. When I do that, you'll see that I can essentially slide where the spline is, and you'll notice the material isn't moving with it. And so one of the things I need to do is adjust that to and from. I also need to adjust the offset a little bit. So here we go. So if I move the offset a touch, that's better. And you'll see that as this goes, I might need to adjust my geometry a little bit because it's trimming off the bottom edge of that thing. And so I've set the offset to 17%. You know, I could actually, the from and to are also settings. I could always adjust to fit spline, and then if I do the from and to, it should, smush this geometry up or stretch it out some. And so that could be a tweak here. But when I do this, I just have to be careful because everything's almost right, except the width over here needs to be a little bigger, and I want that to be hidden. And so what I can do is if I just select the polygon, and I go to my top view, and I hit H to frame everything, and I go to points mode, then I can say, okay, well, let's pull, oops, I have all the points selected. Let's just select one point and make sure we're on the move tool. And I can pull that one point in a little bit so that the hand is not there anymore. And then I can completely forget what else was messed up. I can come back over here and I can select the spline wrap again, which will pop this into position. And it looks like it's these edges here are also not okay. Something I might want to check while I'm here is what happens if I do X minus. That flips it around the other direction, which is not what we want at all. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and adjust those points there. So I will select my polygon again, and I could do this in this mode as well. I do want to make sure that I think it might be flipping it over. Yes, it's flipping it over. So the points that I really need to adjust are probably these 3 points down here. I just need to make this a little bit bigger. And if I've made that big enough, then when we kick back here, now you can see there's a little bit of cutoff here, so I just need a little, I think it's right in here that the problem is, so I'm just gonna pull these out a little bit, and I'm just gonna do that for all 3 of these. And then kick the spline wrap back on, and there we go. So now we have a leaf that's got some curl to it, and it looks somewhat realistic. Now, as it stands, there's still a little hand there, but we're not going to worry about that. That might also just be totally hidden if we were to, say, make multiple copies of this and create a bunch of leaves. So the other thing is, if we get close or if we put a light in the scene, and so go ahead and put a light in the scene, and then turn shadows on for sure, and I set it to be area shadows. And if I render this now, you'll see that it doesn't look anywhere near as real, because it's perfectly flat. And so in my material, what I need to do is I need to grab this image. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Copy Shader, and I need to apply it to the bump channel. And I need to hit Paste. And I'm going to leave it set to where it's at right now, and you'll see that if I zoom in, you'll see that it's actually pushing the veins into the leaf and raising the rest of the texture out. So instead of 20%, I might need it to be negative 20%, so that now it appears as though those veins are popping out of the surface, right? And I could make this negative 40% or something if I wanted a little bit more texture on this surface. And it really depends on your setting. So now, I've got this pretty well set with some texture. It still looks really flat and not quite like a leaf, and that's a little problematic. And so the ways that we would deal with that is by going into reflectance and making some adjustments to our reflectance. If I was to go ahead and in this color channel, in the layer color, paste my leaf again, then when I render this now, instead of having these odd white highlights, all of those specular highlights are based on the color of the leaf. And it actually gives a really nice sense of depth, especially with everything that's going on, right? So I've got this leaf with some really nice depth on here. I may, if it's wet, I may want to go ahead and add a reflection filter and reduce that reflectance a lot, right? And so then I could basically have the leaf be a lot shinier, and I could go in and I could just continue to add and tweak, and you'll see that the layer color here is the same. So again, I might want to go ahead and paste that leaf in there, so that it is shiny, but it's not shiny white, if you understand what I'm saying. So if I make this a little bit smaller and I make this a little bit higher, right, so then I get these green highlights and green reflections off of there rather than the red. Okay, so now we're going to look at, now that we've got this leaf in the scene, let's go ahead and make the spline a child of the polygon, which was a bad choice. Let's not make the spline a child of the polygon. We've taken all this time to set up where things are oriented, and we don't want to do that again. So instead, let's go ahead and go up to the Create menu and go to Null and just call it Leaf. And then let's drop our spline and our polygon and everything into the leaf as children. Okay. And so now the reason we've done that is we can hide it, and now we could copy and paste this leaf and rotate it. Notice that it's going to rotate right from around the center, but if I wanted to undo that last step of copying that, I could make it so it rotates from the stem, which might be a little nicer. So I'm going to use my axis tool. I'm going to use the move tool with the axis selected, so I'm just moving the axis of this null object. I'm going to bring that axis up to the point where it would connect to the tree or to a branch. I'm going to shut the axis off, and now if I copy this and paste it and rotate it, right, I get leaves that rotate from about the same point. Now obviously I'm not going to want these leaves to be intersecting with one another, so maybe I'll lift one up. All right, and so now I've got these two leaves, and my lighting is pretty terrible. So I'm going to go ahead and, select my light, lift it up a little bit higher, and pull it over here a little bit, and then render the scene. Okay, so now I've got a couple leaves that are looking pretty nice and casting shadows and all of that. And so now there's one of the things that is missing with this leaf is that leaves are luminous, right? They are not. They transmit light. They're actually somewhat transparent, and so usually we would use the subsurface scattering tool to accomplish that effect. However, if we're not modeling leaves with thickness, it will not work. And so we need another option. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Luminance channel, and we're going to turn Luminance on. And the texture that we're going to choose is under Effects, and it's called ChanLum. And ChanLum basically does subsurface scattering for something that doesn't have any thickness. It'll work on other objects too. The one thing is you have to have lights, you have to have shadows turned on your lights, or else it's not going to work at all. And so I've got shadows turned on. You'll notice clearly this isn't right because it's this bright white, but what it does is it basically mixes this ChanLum color with the color of your other objects. And so what we need to do is we need to choose a color to make this look right. And we're actually going to, the way we have to do this is first we want to change this from normal to multiply, right? And when we do that, we're not going to see too much of a difference there, but it is there. And then what we need to do is we need to click on the ChanLum options, and you'll see we can't change color here, right? It's just white. And the things we can change are the samples, the offset, the sample type. And that's why we have a lot of this noise on here, is the few numbers of samples. If we were to, increase the number of samples to say 12 or something like that and render this, we get much finer noise on there. And we could go further up. It just depends on, again, how close these leaves are, how much that matters. And that noise sometimes actually looks nice. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back up one level. And with this, in order to get the color of the leaf to be transmitted through here, we're going and to be applied to the ChanLum, what we need to do is we need to come down and we need to create a layer shader. And when we do that, the layer shader will automatically place the previous shader in it, but it will switch the mode back to normal. It needs to be set to multiply, or else it will not work effectively. And then what we need to do is we need to create an image. And so the image we're going to want, once this sets up, is this leaf fractal. So I'm going to hit open. And then now that I've got this multiply and I've got this normal, and if I pull this down in the other order, right, so now you can already see that these leaves seem to be more luminous, but this isn't quite what the shader does. So what the shader does is it allows us to have backlight hitting objects and that backlight coming through the top surface. So to make this really clear, I'm going to go ahead and create a spotlight. And I'm going to rotate that spotlight so that it's pointing up towards the leaves. And I'm going to change my view a bit so I can see where in relation to these leaves this object is, because I want to make sure that wherever it's hitting, and I'm going to pull this down a bit so the dot's a bit bigger, it'll at least hit this bottom leaf. Now there are some issues with it actually transmitting through both of these, but we'll take a look at that in a second. So let's go ahead and render this now that we have the second light. Now I added this light, but before we render it, remember we have to have shadows on for this effect to work. And okay, you can kind of see it down here. So I'm going to move my light a little bit further back, because what I'm going to do is I'm trying to show you where it's in shadow. Okay, so here we go. So if I render this, right, so you can see now that there's this, that the light is transmitting through the bottom of this leaf, right? So the shadow, if I rotate my view, and you're not seeing so much of it on this top leaf, but you do see light come through the back of this. Now, one of the issues is that this backlighting, no matter what color I make my light, so if I make this magenta, and I render this, right? Oh my gosh, did it actually work? It actually made it magenta. Huh. Earlier that was not functioning at all for me. Great. So yeah, so you can use the light back there. That color can make changes. Something else you can do with the layer shader is to add different effects. That actually looks really cool. But let's go ahead and make this a warmer light. Now the other thing is, at this point with 100% intensity, you can see it's kind of yellowing that area a bit more. But what really makes this stand out is if I go ahead and turn on my fall off, and then make sure I'm in model mode so I can adjust this and, basically strengthen this some, right? So now I have a lot more intensity, and you can see that yellow coming through, especially in the areas that were more lightly colored, right? But something it doesn't do is it doesn't transmit through and hit this other leaf. And if I run this on the bottom side, right, you'll see that what I'm getting here is I'm getting this bright spot from below, and these other areas where it's more hazy are from the light from above, right? So I'm getting the shadow of the leaf on top of it that's being cast through the other leaves. So this is a really nice effect, and you can tell it doesn't take long to render. One final thing that we can that you can do with this, and that you can just do with that we need to talk about in general, is if I go to my layer shader on the Luminance channel and I go to add an effect, I have all of these different effects. These are essentially adjustment layers like in Photoshop, right? So if I go to hue, saturation, and lightness, and I adjust my hue, right, I can make it so this leaf looks like it is reddish brown. Now in this case it's really blasted out because I have the because that light is so close and so intense. But you can even see on some of the spill over here, right, it's giving me a nice variation of color across the leaf. And so this is something that you can do either in the Luminance channel. If I applied it to the color channel, right, I'd actually get, I could just do that with the color. But this allows for some really nice variation. So if I reduce the intensity of this light some, right, if I pull the fall off, back in a touch and render this, that light is just really too close. So I'm going to pull this down out of here a little bit, right? And you can see it's still going pretty magenta, and so I'd probably want to adjust where the color is on that setting. But even if I turn this light off and render the scene now, oops, sorry, that's the wrong light. If I turn this light off, right, where the light isn't directly hitting it back here, I'm getting a little bit of color variation. And so that's something to think about. If we roll under this, right, those leaves are going to be completely red from the light that's being transmitted through the top surface and down. Okay, so this has been a tutorial to show you both how to make leaves, and then also a bit more about materials, and specifically using this ChanLum shader. The next tutorial will cover how to do more complex, or it'll look at more of those effects, and really it's going to be a tutorial about like how to figure out what those effects do in that menu of options when you apply them, and like what channel to apply them to and how to find that information. Okay, have a good afternoon.